Activity 3, reproduction. Joe has a younger brother and sister. He starts to think about how they each look different. Except for being tall and having loose joints like his mother, Joe looks more like their father, with straight light brown hair and dark brown eyes. Joe's little brother looks more like their mother, with curly dark brown hair and gray eyes. Joe's sister is more of a blend, with their father's dark brown eyes and hair that's light brown like their father's and curly like their mother's. Joe starts to wonder about how they all seem to have received different combinations of traits from their parents. Every human is the offspring of two biological parents. Most organisms that you are familiar with, like the kittens in the photo below, are also the offspring of two parents. They have certain features of both parents, but are not exactly like either parent. Some organisms, however, are the offspring of only one parent. They reproduce by making an exact copy of themselves. In this activity, you will read about how different organisms reproduce. This will help you evaluate your models from the last activity. Guiding question. What do cells have to do with sexual and asexual reproduction? Asexual reproduction. There are two basic kinds of reproduction, asexual and sexual. Some organisms can reproduce both ways, while other organisms can only use one of the two kinds of reproduction. If you completed the cell unit, you learned about bacteria and other microorganisms. These organisms reproduce asexually. In asexual reproduction, a single-celled organism, such as bacteria or an amoeba, reproduces by dividing in two. Each new organism produced, called an offspring, is identical to the parent cell. And if you look here on the diagram on the right, you can see the parent cell. There's just one parent. It makes a copy of its DNA or its genes, and then it just splits in half. So now we have the parent cell still there, but then we have a whole new offspring cell that is like identical to the parent cell. Pretty cool. Stop to think 1. In asexual reproduction of a bacterial cell, is it clear which of the two cells produced is the parent and which is the offspring? Explain. Well, let's take a look back up here. They look pretty identical to me. So it is not clear. And that's what a clone is, right? We write up here that it is an exact copy. And that's exactly what's happening. Let's keep reading. These two identical offspring of asexual reproduction are both exact copies of a single parent organism. These exact copies are called clones. A clone inherits all of its traits from its one parent. I even want to underline one parent. Each clump of bacterial cells in the photograph below is a clone. Each clump was formed by many divisions over time, starting from one bacterial cell. In other words, each bacterium in the clump is descended from that one original cell. Each of the cells in these clones has identical genes and traits as its parent cell, except in rare cases when a random change occurs. You will learn more about these random changes in a later activity. Now, that's a real picture of some bacteria growing in a petri dish. Ooh. Even some multicellular organisms can reproduce asexually. I'm going to highlight that because some people forget. Some people think only unicellular organisms like bacteria or amoebas can reproduce asexually. But some bigger things can too. Budding is the name given to a process in which a small new organism grows directly out from the parent's body. And there's that little small organism I just highlighted in that picture. One animal that reproduces this way is the hydra, seen below. Each cell in the bud has the same number and kind of genes and traits as the parent cell that produced it. And that bud will soon break off from the parent, and then that will become an identical offspring organism. The strawberry plant, in the photo below, can also reproduce asexually by budding. Tiny new plants are produced on a root-like runner. Each of these little plants can eventually separate from the parent and become a new individual identical to its parent. Any organism that is produced through asexual reproduction can be considered a clone, since it inherits all its genes and traits from one parent. I'm going to highlight that statement too. That's pretty cool. Stop to think too. Your friend tells you, only single-celled organisms reproduce asexually. After all, how could a multicellular organism do that? How do you respond to your friend? Well, you could bring up the example of the Hydra. This is a multicellular organism. All organisms have cells, and cells can make copies of themselves. So multicellular organisms can also make clones of themselves. But it's usually only very simple organisms. You're not going to see a complex organism like a dog or like a human be able to do this. Our DNA is way too complicated for that. All right, we're going to pause here before we dive into sexual reproduction.